Hey folks, just wanted to give a shout out to Dominic Eagle, the author of tonight's story. Be sure to go check out his channel, Black Volumes, for more awesome stories. A link will be in the description below. I broke a Guinness World Record by sleeping for 13 days. Since opening my eyes, I've seen awful things. And awful things have seen me. The world that you see is only an infinitesimally small piece of reality's canvas. The surface level. The surface is, in a way, a facade. Beneath it, there lurk hidden horrors that humans weren't ever meant to see. I learned of this hidden world when I woke from 13 days of sleep. At first, I thought I might be suffering from cognitive decline, but the hospital gave me a clean bill of health. Besides, my friend saw something too. To secure this world record, I studied the approach of a UK hypnotist, Peter Powers, who achieved 8 consecutive days of hypnotic sleep. Following several failed attempts, I managed to surpass his feat by quite a sizable margin. I fell asleep on December 20th, 2024. Then, I woke in a brand new year on the misty, wintry afternoon of January 2nd, 2025. I fell asleep. I woke up. Gee, that makes it all sound rather routine, doesn't it? Let me tell you, waking on that bitter, snowy morning did not feel anything like waking from an 8-hour sleep. It didn't even feel like waking from a long, unconscious slumber after a night of heavy drinking. In fact, the flu once conked me out for a little under 24 hours. This 13-day sleep wasn't even like that. Grogginess doesn't begin to cover it. I felt pain. Absurd, incalculable pain. It split not only the sides of my brain, but the insides of my brain. When I woke in my bed, grunting loudly and fumbling for my phone, I heard Luke charge up the stairs to check on me. My friend and flatmate had been looking after me during my 2-week slumber. Anyway, Luke rang our other friend, Rebecca, because he was worried about me. I was complaining about a persistent ticking sound apparently. I seemed to be experiencing auditory and visual hallucinations. I do vaguely remember as my flatmate burst into my room, seeing a tall, oblong-headed shadow flitting across the staircase. In retrospect, that idea brings me unimaginable dread. But I'll have to start from the beginning for you to understand why. Luke and Rebecca rushed me to the hospital when I didn't show any signs of overcoming these hallucinations. When I started talking about red sunlight pouring through the windows of my home, Luke fetched the keys to his car. We had expected that I might experience some health problems, of course, because a 312-hour sleep is hardly natural. The recording. I weakly mumbled as my friends guided me across the car park towards the hospital entrance. The Guinness rep said, "We'll sort out all of that after you've seen a doctor," Luke promised, struggling to keep my weighty, near-limp arm over his shoulder. "I'm just glad you're awake," Becca said from my other side, voice rugged and frail. She hadn't wanted me to do any of this. The snow clung to the soles of my boots, and the fog clung to my skin. Even on that overcast day, however, the world seemed unthinkably bright. I blamed it on my weak, straining eyes, but I still expressed my concerns to my friends. I don't remember the exact wording of my delirious mumble, but the sky looked stranger by the second. That red daylight persisted, trying to puncture the clouds above. "The sky's perfectly normal, Quinn," Luke assured me as the hospital's automatic doors opened in front of me. "We'll ask the doctors to run some tests, okay?" And we did, but I was chastised by the professionals who attended to me. I'd spoken to a GP before undertaking the experiment. He'd warned me against attempting sleep by hypnosis, but Luke and I were never really the types to listen to authority figures. We had dull lives, and we were forever trying to make them a little more thrilling. As the hospital workers ran blood tests, I felt nauseated and agonized beyond measure. Well, beyond the NHS 0 to 3 assessment scale. I have felt severe pain before, but this was more than a 3. The pain in my body and mind had something to do with that blinding color beyond the clouds. I could still see the rat out of the hospital window, threatening to snag a subtle hole through the gray blanket in the sky. "Obviously, this is difficult for us, Mr. Trenton," the doctor told me. "I've dealt with patients hallucinating as the result of sleep deprivation. On the other hand, oversleeping, to this extent at least, is, well, quite frankly, uncharted territory for me. I do remember that hypnotist back in the 90s who, yes, he's the one whose record Quinn just broke. Luke interjected. Will he be okay? The doctor sighed, speaking to my friends as if I weren't in the room. Well, the results of the test are all positive. Quinn is a little nutritionally depleted, but he's physically and mentally healthy. Healthy? Look at him, Becca whimpered, nodding at me as my eyes blinked rapidly. He looks like he's about to pass out. He was talking about the sky being red when we were. I share your concerns. The doctor interrupted. You were both right to bring your friend here. This has certainly taken a toll on his well-being, but not a permanent one. That is, at the end of the day, the best-case scenario. I really do think that things will look better tomorrow, once Mr. Trenton has had a normal night's sleep. He needs to allow his body to reset. He needs to acclimate back to reality essentially. And the hallucinations will stop, I slurred in a fragile mumble. The doctor threw up his hands in exasperation. As I told you, Mr. Trenton, this is new territory for me. Believe it or not, we don't get many patients who experiment with hypnotic sleep. Alright, there's no need for that tone, Becca snapped. We just want our friend to get better. Go to bed at a sensible time tonight, Mr. Trenton, the doctor said. And most importantly, wake up at a normal time. You just need a normal 8 hours of sleep. That's my professional opinion. As we walked out of the hospital, my friends ranted and raved about the rudeness of the doctor who scolded me. I was barely tuned into their conversation. Instead, I focused on the oddities of my surroundings. Even within those four walls, far from the red sky above, things looked and sounded ever so slightly wrong to me. And then came something tangible to accompany that horrid feeling in my gut. At the end of the corridor, barreling towards us, was a gurney being propelled by several alarmed staff members in blue scrubs. I wasn't frightened of the man, frothing from the lips, who was writhing on that trolley which came towards us on juddering wheels. It was a red figure, 6 feet tall, that eked a gasp of fright from me. He wasn't red like the sky. He was red as if his body had been turned inside out, textured like the meaty muscle which should have been below his non-existent skin. The figure, striding alongside the traveling trolley, did not look at the world with eyes. His face, much like the rest of his body, was entirely coated in that very same red, meaty, dripping muscle. In fact, the haunting figure wasn't looking towards us at all. He was looking at the gurney patient who was in the throes of a seizure. Worst of all, this monster, unseen by anyone else in the corridor it seemed, was scooping droplets of saliva from the sick man's spluttering mouth. Then, with a spittle-covered hand made of nightmarish muscle, the invisible figure began to smear the sick man's droplets on passers-by. The creature was transmitting the patient's sickness. I saw this and, in petrified silence, did nothing. I only sprang into action as that wretched thing lifted its saliva-coated hand towards Luke, beelining straight towards him. "No!" I screamed, shoving both of my friends through an open doorway on the right-hand side of the corridor. "What on earth, Quinn?" Luke huffed, losing his footing as he was sent crashing into the empty room. I blocked my two friends from leaving as the gurney came shooting past the door. I stood and watched, ignoring the incessant questioning from Luke and Becca, and then followed evidence that I hadn't imagined a thing. The red figure came in tow, striding only a few yards behind the trolley, but he stopped beside our open doorway. Then, completely fixed to the spot, the inside-out man twisted his vile neck, producing a rubbery squeak to let his eyeless face turn towards us, turn towards me. I tried to scream to my friends, tried to do something, anything. In the end, I only managed to stand frozen to the spot. Then, the creature twisted its neck again, returning its head to a forwards-facing position, and it followed the trolley which had shut down the hallway. He saw me. More than that, he saw that I saw him, and I realized that no living thing was ever supposed to see the things I had seen, the things pulling the strings behind the scenes. "Earth to Quinn," Becca continued. "You didn't have to shove us out of the way. I'm sure that trolley wasn't going to hit us." "I'm sorry," I muttered. knees knocking as Luke scooped my arm around his shoulder. "Come on," he said as Becca took my other side. "You still look a little unsteady on your legs. Let's get you home. Early night tonight, yeah? Maybe things will look a bit better for you tomorrow, like the doctor suggested." I nodded. Then let my two friends guide me out of the room and down the corridor. As we exited into the hospital car park, trudging through sludgy snow, I noticed it. A change in the air. Instinctively, I looked up and noticed that two gray clouds had parted. Through the gap, I did not see blue, but red. Horrific, undeniable red. "Tell me you see the red," I murmured to my friends, head tilted backwards to gawp at the topsy-turvy gates of hell above. Becca cast her frowning face upwards. "No, Quinn, the sky still isn't red. Come on, let's go home, eat some food, then get a good night's rest." I lowered my head to reply to the friend on my right-hand side. But my friend caught something horrid within the misty car park. I inhaled disbelievingly as a dancing shade with the vague outline of a man soared across the glistening surfaces of parked cars. It moved from one to the next like Peter Pan's untethered shadow. My dry throat tried to let out a word, a scream, or an anything, but I managed only to croak painfully as my friends dragged my feeble form to Luke's Corsa. The pursuing shadow flew off the side of the car beside us, and it was gone. There followed a moment of calm, a moment of relief. I decided that I had, as everybody was insisting, simply been hallucinating. Becca's high-pitched shriek from the other side of the car immediately put that thought to rest. I rotated slowly, wanting to face anything but what I knew I would see. A nightmare beyond comprehension. There stood that reversed man, wearing rat muscle as a suit once more. No more shadow dancing across the car park. This was a very real, very physical thing. And it was hoisting Luke into the air, eyeing him without eyes. It all happened in an instant. Luke's wriggling body entrapped within the creature's gripping fingers was pulled into that rat meaty torso. My friend screamed, along with Becca and me. The sounds of our haunted cries mingled with the snaps and squelches of bones breaking and guts reshaping. Luke's body was contorted in a display that stunned and paralyzed my thoughts. My mind and body dissociated as my friend was squeezed through the creature's meaty torso, slipping beneath the dense, resistant surface of a soupy pool. "Luke!" Becca screeched, falling backwards against the car as she looked up at the unfolding scene of terror. I shook my head free of the migraine and shook my limbs free of the lethargy which had enveloped my entire body. Then, suppressing my horror and acting on some instinct to survive, I sprinted around the front bumper of the car and grabbed my friend's shoulders. I didn't need to tell Becca to run. She did it without asking. Adrenaline fueled my wobbly limbs, keeping my body working to some extent as we dotted out of the car park. But I could feel my legs whining in disapproval as I pushed out of the car park and down the main road. After several minutes of fleeing, whilst screaming and bawling, Becca and I had put the hospital far behind us, finding ourselves in the center of our strangely deserted town. We slipped into an alleyway and hid behind a dustbin, slouching against the ground. Fog filled the air more crushingly than before, and the snow beneath our rears felt firmer. There was a heaviness consuming my town. "He just disappeared," Becca whispered, "into thin air." And I finally understood. "You didn't see him, did you?" "Oh, I saw him," she whimpered, eyes vacant as she stared at the red brick wall opposite us. "No, not Luke," I wheezed. "The thing that took him." "Thing?" Becca asked, turning her tear-filled eyes towards me. "I saw the air swallow him. He became..." My friend buried her head into my shoulder and started to blubber loudly. And as the adrenaline started to pass, there came an ache in my chest too. I started to think of Luke, started to process what had happened to him. I'd rescued him from the clutches of the rat figure in the corridor. He had, in the end, met a far worse fate. I peered behind the veil, and he suffered. I don't know how long we spent sitting there, but I know the sun had set when there finally came something which stirred me from my haunted thoughts. That oh so familiar ticking sound. Not slight and near imperceptible as it had been that morning, but all-encompassing. "Do you hear that?" I timidly asked my friend. Becca was asleep. She didn't reply, and I knew I shouldn't. But I rose to my feet and left her there. I wandered out from the alley into the desolate road. I want to say that I don't know why I did it, but that would be a lie. I left Becca because I knew that if I were to bring her with me, she would meet the same fate as Luke. I had to get far away from her. This hidden world was only there for me. I would suffer alone. As I wandered aimlessly through the town center, the ticking grew and grew, like my chest pain. A pain that was no longer just a residual pang of horror from witnessing my dear friend meet such a terrible end. It was something new, something I couldn't place. No matter how many times I twirled to shoot my gaze at darkened alleyways and shop fronts, there was nothing to be seen. No one to be seen. It was only 6 in the evening. Our town is usually packed at that hour. The mist and the cloak of night shouldn't have been enough to deter folk, especially just after the dawn of a new year. The ticking reached a crescendo, and then it was joined by something else. A crunch, then another, and another. Footsteps wading through the snow, and they weren't my own. I twisted unwillingly and screeched when I saw not a shade dancing across the white, and not even a man with his innards worn as an outer suit. Standing in the white of the mist and the snow, facing towards me, was a figure even farther from a man than the inside-out horror. He wore no clothes, and his skin was made of fleshy oak, not like the bark of a tree, but the polished hardwood planks of fine furniture. The figure stood at least 10 feet in height, but it wasn't his gangly wooden limbs that drew a scream from the back of my throat. It was his head, his perfectly angular, rectangular head. Like the red meat figure, this new nightmare did not look upon me with eyes. His face was that of a grandfather clock. Where there should have been retinas and nostrils, there was a white oval bearing Roman numerals and 2 hands ticking away like pestilent insects. And where there should have been a mouth, there was a chasm of blackness. Where there should have been a tongue, there instead swung a licking pendulum. It beckoned me into its depths. Worst of all, I complied. I found myself walking towards the figure. With every tick and tock of the pendulum, I took another step, moving in terrifying synchronicity, and the second hand rotated near to the top of the man's clock face, and it was approaching not a 12, but a 13. I opened my mouth to scream, hoping Becca would hear me from the next street over, but all that came from my mouth, horrifyingly, was more ticking, the clicking and clacking to be exact, of my tongue against the back of my gums, as if it were also a pendulum swinging to and fro. My body and soul belonged to the grandfather man, and I didn't want to imagine what he had in store for me. It wasn't a show of willpower that saved me. I didn't find the strength to turn away from the hypnotic, alluring pull of the feverish nightmare. What saved me was a bright, blinding light coming from the snowy road behind the tall, horrid figure. A light that consumed the figure, me, and all other things in the road. A truck tore straight through the grandfather man, hidden to the driver's eyes. And then, darkness took me. When I woke a couple of days ago, with a sobbing Becca by my side, I found myself back in the hospital. The truck had swerved, and I had thankfully only been hit by its wing mirror. Most bizarrely of all, I felt well rested. I'm not championing the healing powers of being near crumpled by hurtling steel. I certainly felt somewhat disoriented by the accident. I just didn't feel quite so displaced. In fact, I felt relatively normal. I told myself that, perhaps, I had reset my mind and body, just as the doctor had promised I would. I told myself that I'd undone the damage caused by sleeping for 13 days. The world I'd seen was invisible to me again. It was only when Becca visited me again this afternoon, still covered in tears and snot, that there came a jolt of doubt. I jumped up from my bed, grunting painfully as I supported myself on a broken leg in a rat plaster cast, and my friend led me towards the window. I started to bawl, near silently. "Is it still red?" Becca asked as I eyed the sky above. I nodded, and my cricked neck let out the sound of a popping joint. Then followed a second pop, and a third, and a fourth. A few hours later, I've accepted that it's the sound of ticking. I understand. I'm not supposed to see these things. I'm not supposed to hear these things. They're going to make sure I don't.